Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to welcome you at MIM TV, and we are here together with a fantastic person. We just got to know each other sometime short, and her name is Naomi Bohm. She holds PhD. She's obviously a psychologist, and not an average psychologist. She's a psychologist working with trauma from war, trauma from disaster. She's a consulting psychologist, which means that she's not only talking about that, but also literally helping people cope with trauma through a process that she had developed, which is called a Building Resilience Intervention, BRI. And she will be talking about this in her presentation, which we will use for the start. And then we will open floor for questions. So after we get to know Naomi, we'll get to know her method of working with trauma from terrorism, from war, from natural disaster. We will get to know her personal story, a little bit of her books. Then I will be happy to ask some questions myself and to ask your questions, our dear fellows. So let's start. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm just gonna put on the PowerPoint so that will kind of direct me and get me going. I don't hear the translator. Am I correct to assume that she's translating?
She's translating it's simultaneous in Ukrainian, and there is a separate channel for it. So she's doing her work.
Okay. And if she could just tell me if I'm going too fast or too slow, that would be helpful.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm really excited to talk with you, because I think that we in Israel have a lot to share from our experiences with terrorism and war. And I know the Ukrainian people are really undergoing a vicious assault currently. This war, as it's portrayed in our media, is very terrible. War is always a terrible thing. But I think that the Ukrainian people have shown incredible resilience during the last several months, the last 2 months, I guess it is. And we will speak tonight as to what is resilience, and what are some of the features of it, and what can we do to build resilience. And of course, I'll be sharing with you my experiences working here in Israel, and I've lived in Israel for a long time. My accent is American, and I was born in the US and moved to Israel about 35 years ago. So I've been here for a very long time. And I started off professionally as a school psychologist and moved into the field of trauma and resilience building as a result of what was going on around me. The vicious terrorist attacks, bombs, blowing up buses, suicide bombers, all that happening in the early 2000 to 2005. And then, of course, we've had several wars during that time, and from then till now, and we learn from all of them. So let's get started. What I want to ask you all first, I want you all to take a moment, and I can't see any of you, but I just want you to stop for a moment and notice, what is your stress level? With the pictures don't go along. The pictures really should be opposite. So this 10 is a high stress level, and 1 is a very low stress level. So if you needed to choose what your stress level is right now, take a moment and just check in with yourself. How stressed are you? 1 being very low, very relaxed, everything is wonderful, and 10 being extremely tense and tight and stressed. How are you feeling? How are you feeling right this moment? And if you want to write your answers in the chat, I'm happy to see, I think the numbers will be the same. Oh, there we go. Wonderful. Good. So you can write your numbers in the chat. So we're kind of all over the board. 6, 7, 3, 4, 8, 2, 5. Okay, all over the board. Gee, those people who are 2, I want to learn from you. Okay, great. Okay, now what I want to do is just take a moment, and I want you all to breathe. Breathing is about the simplest thing that we can do. And when I say breathe, there's a special way to breathe. You put your hands on your belly, your lower abdomen, and I want you just to take a moment to take 3 breaths. And you can count the breaths. You can count 4 on the in-breath and 6 on the out breath. You always want the out breath to be a little bit longer than the in breath. So let's do that together. And I always say we're doing it for me, because before I talk to any group, I get a little bit nervous. So it helps me to calm down. So even if you're 2 right now, just breathe along with me. Put your hands on your lower abdomen, and we're going to breathe in. Count to yourselves. Hold the breath for a moment and then breathe out through your mouth or nose to the count of 6. And let's do it again. And breathe out. And one more time. And breathe out. Okay. And now I'm going to ask you the very same question. What's your stress level now? Okay. Not what it was 2 minutes ago. What is it now? And what you can write is whether it's +1, -1, +3, -2. Has it gone up or has it gone down? Oh, there we go. -1, +2, -2. Let's see if we can get a few more answers. -1, 0, no change. -3, nice. -3, -1, -3. Okay, great. You can keep sending in your answers. We'll take a little bit of a look later, but the idea being is that we impact on ourselves. We can affect ourselves. There are things that we can do to help us cope in stressful situations. And war is certainly a stressful situation. So that little exercise really was meant to show that we can both impact on ourselves and also do things very often that will impact on the people around us. The first thing that we can do for ourselves is to calm ourselves down, to take a moment, check in, doing what's going on, and take a few breaths. And just a few breaths will very often, not always, because we saw some people didn't change at all, and a few people all of a sudden got so anxious that they were nervous that they got even more stressed out. But for most of us, it brings down the stress level 1, 2, 3. It brings it down somewhat. And that gives us a sense that we have a little bit of control in what is sometimes feels totally uncontrollable situation. So let's talk for a few minutes about what is resilience. And resilience, very often the term is used to mean bouncing back. Something terrible happens. Somebody close to me was hurt. I was hurt. I almost died. They almost died. Something, maybe I was sick, whatever it was, something bad happened. How quickly do I return to my normal functioning? Now, we know that when trauma happens, it's very normal to experience post-traumatic symptoms. Most people will have some symptoms. If you experience, maybe by now you are used to the air raid sirens. I don't know, but you can be sure that the first time when the war first started and you had no idea what was going on, and you heard that air raid siren and your heart started beating very, very quickly, it really threw you. It got you off your center. And for many people, I imagine they walked around for several days, maybe several weeks, maybe even until now, feeling unbalanced. So when we talk about resilience, what we're talking about is being able to return to normal functioning pretty quickly. Now, we can discuss how quickly that might be, but the idea is the resilience is the ability to bounce back. And people always used to talk about, in English, that's the term. I don't know if there's a comparable term in Ukrainian, to bounce back. But I like the picture of the spring. You see the picture of that spring on the screen. And the idea is when stress happens or trauma happens, the spring is compressed. A lot of pressure is put on that spring. And resilience is the ability for the spring to return to its previous shape. So there are those who prefer to use the idea or the concept of bouncing forward, because they say that when trauma happens, we never return to be exactly the people we were before. We learn about ourselves, we learn about the people around us, we gain experience. So we never actually bounce back. What we do, or what we can do, is bounce forward. We come back into our lives with new perspective and added value. And that added value or new perspective might be related, for example, to our appreciation for life, our appreciation for security, our appreciation for the good things that we have in our own life that maybe we took for granted until now. So that is one definition of resilience. It very often means flexibility or elasticity, and you see that in the spring as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment.
Dear Naomi, may I ask? Yeah. I think we're seeing the first slide only. So if you could start the slideshow, then we will see what you actually show on the screen. Because as of right now, we see the.
What about now? Still?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Hang on. Let's start it again. Let's see if this does. Okay, now?
Yeah, now we see the spring.
Okay, good.
Great, thank you.
You missed the beautiful picture. I had such a nice picture there. Okay, when we were breathing, I was looking at a nice picture. Okay, anyways, so resilience relates to coping. How do people cope? How do we do that for the long term? And you folks have been in this war already. It's not one day, and it's not 6 days, and it's not 2 weeks. It's already been several months, and the end isn't really in sight. So we're talking about resilience for the long term. If we think about World War II, and we can think about London and the bombing of London, that was long-term resilience. They were in that situation for, I don't remember if it was 9 months or a year, but it was really a long time that they were in a very difficult situation, not unlike the situation in many of the cities in the Ukraine. We're talking about stamina and strength as well. But what's interesting with the term resilience is we're not saying that what you need to have is this wall, this strong wall. We're tough. We're going to be tough. What we're saying is resilience is more flexible. And the term resilience, the concept of resilience, it's a very interesting concept. It comes from the field of metallurgy. I hope the interpreter got that. The field of metallurgy. And the idea being that scientists who studied metals were interested in how much pressure, how much weight you could put on a piece of material before it broke. So there's some steel you can put very, very heavy things on and it won't break. It might bend, but it won't break. And some things you put something very heavy on and it will break. Resilience is that characteristic of how it withstands pressure and how does it go back to its original shape. So a sponge, for example, goes back to its original shape very quickly. Metal gets bent and may get stuck in that bent, so it is less resilient. That's where the term originated in, and that's why I say that elasticity and flexibility seem to be paramount. Now, I wrote a book with my colleague, Michael Dixon, and the reason I refer to it is that's how I think Alina got to us, was through our book. And in our book, what we did is we interviewed 14 different people who showed tremendous resilience in the face of trauma. Now, none of the trauma, I'm thinking, none of it was living through a war. There were people who were injured, but they were different kinds of trauma, a variety of different kinds of trauma. But the underlying piece was that they all showed tremendous resilience. And what we tried to do, we made up this word, by the way, is resilience, is a play on words, Israel and resilience. And what the subtitle is what Israelis can teach the world. And I think that really in Israel, we've had so much experience with war and terrorism that we have, and so many psychologists, that we really have a lot to teach the world about how to handle these terrible events. And what we did in our book is we tried to pull out the 3 keys to building resilience, because one of the questions that people ask is, can you build resilience? Is resilience inborn, or is it something that you can build? And I'm a firm believer that, some people are more resilient than others, but everybody can increase their resilience. And when we're talking about resilience,
could you switch the slide, please?
You don't see it?
We see the spring.
You see the spring still. Oh, okay. Stop. Let's see. Stop share. Let's share again. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I appreciate you updating me on this. Maybe I'll just do it like this, and maybe that'll work better.
Yeah, that's the resilience. Is resilience.
Is resilience. So what we're talking about first and foremost is flexibility. So if what you're doing isn't working for you, try something else. If you feel like you're getting into a rut, or you're still feeling extremely anxious, or something's not working right, what else can I do? Look around, talk to people, explore, and say, I have to try something else because what I am doing is not working. So that is one key to resilience. Another key to resilience, and this may be difficult for people coming from the Ukraine, because in Israel, I live in Israel, and I have met many groups of people, both from the Ukraine and from the former Soviet Union. And one of the characteristics that I find is that people are very closed with their feelings. They don't like to share their feelings. And one of the things that we find is that when people are able to share their feelings, they are more resilient. The idea being, all of us have a wide range of emotions. We're not always happy. We're not always joyful. Sometimes we're afraid. Sometimes we're anxious. Sometimes we're angry. Sometimes we're tense. Now, what we know about emotions is that they come and they go. You're never stuck with one emotion and one emotion only. If we're able to become empathic to ourselves, to listen inside, how am I feeling, and share our feelings with the people around us, and it might be family members, it might be friends, it might be coworkers. If we're able to do that, that is something that builds resilience. If we just push it all aside and push it all aside and push it all aside, then we live in a very narrow range. We're not able to feel very much of anything at all. And that makes it difficult to cope in difficult situations. I learned this in Israel during the Second Intifada, when the buses were being bombed right and left. People were afraid, and they were afraid to talk about being afraid. And one of the things that we learned about is that talking about being afraid is probably a good thing. It helps people cope. It allows them to feel that they're not alone. Doesn't mean you're going to be stuck in fear forever, but sharing that fear is very helpful. And then the final piece is meaning making, how we make meaning from difficult situations. And I think this is one of the things that we're seeing, at least in our media, we're seeing from the people in the Ukraine, the solidarity, the way the people have come together, and the meaning that they instill or they get from this. We are standing together. We're not going to let Russia rule us. We want our independence. We're a different people. We're willing to sacrifice a lot for that. That is part of meaning making. And we have that very strongly in Israel also. We go through difficult times on a regular basis. I don't know if you have heard our news in the last couple of weeks. It hasn't been so great. There was a terrible terrorist attack on Thursday night, right after we celebrated our Independence Day. And 3 people were murdered in a terrible way. And yet, we are resilient because we know we're here for a reason. We know we belong in this country, and this is our country. And that meaning is a very important part of resilience. So those are the 3 things we focused on in our book. And I put together another few slides, but I'm thinking that maybe what we should do is move to well, I don't know. How many more minutes do you give me?
Let's say 5 to,
Okay.
give you
5 more
the
minutes.
full understanding of this structure.
Okay. So if we think about how is the war affecting us, when I say us, I mean you, how is it affecting us? There's uncertainty, there's fear. Some people, maybe many people, I don't really know, have lost people close to them or farther away. There's mourning, there's grief. There's certainly a lack of control. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know how bad it's going to get. For some people, there may be loneliness because they may stay in their houses. They may be afraid to go out. For others, there may be a lack of purpose. They're not sure what they should be doing and how should they be doing it. There's a lot of stress, and maybe people after 2 months are experiencing a sense of burnout because we have a lot of energy at the beginning. We mobilize, we do everything we can. We have a lot of adrenaline. And then as it continues and continues, it's very hard to maintain that high level of adrenaline, and that leads to burnout. So if we're feeling a little bit short-tempered, tired, trouble getting up in the morning, those are all signs of burnout. So what can help us? If we look to see what kinds of things can help us, we talked about the breathing, we talked about sharing our feelings. One of the things that I wanted to mention, and I think that this can be very helpful for you personally, and perhaps in your work environment, is looking at the things we are grateful for. There are a lot of really good studies, and these are some of the names. You can see Seligman, Emmons, McCullough. These are the names related to gratitude research, but what they have found is that people who actually spend time writing down 3 to 5 things they're grateful for every single day feel happier, have more positive emotions. They even have better health and better relationships, and are able to deal with adversity. So this is really interesting. All you need to do is take a notebook or a piece of paper, write down 3 to 5 things. And these 3 to 5 things can be small. It could be, oh, I'm thankful that I had a wonderful dinner tonight. I'm grateful that I have a roof over my head. I'm grateful for my children, for my spouse, for my good health. It could be big things. It could be little things. I'm grateful that I did the laundry today and put it away. It doesn't have to be something really big. It can be little as well. If we stop and make a list and actually write down the things we are grateful for, this can be a really wonderful way to help us maintain our feeling of satisfaction in life and a good feeling. Let's see. So that's what that is. And then we talked a little bit about meaning and making meaning, finding hope, protecting that hope. And there's been lots written about hope, but I really wanted to emphasize the second piece. Remember that we have been through difficult times before, and we will get through this. Remembering that our parents and our grandparents, if we think about World War II, or whatever it was, that was difficult before, and we got through it, we will get through this difficult time. We need to find what helps us, what keeps us enthusiastic, energetic, involved. And the final piece is finding community. Even getting together tonight, I see that there are 76 participants tonight, and there may be more who listen afterwards. This is a community, sharing these ideas in community, talking about these things. Belonging is a very important part of resilience. Now, I had some thoughts about how you translate this to employees and organizations, but I think we're going to skip. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to save the rest of this for till the end. How's that? I'm going to stop the share. And if we have some more time, we'll talk about it at the end. If you want to invite me back, if I haven't overstayed my welcome, we could talk about it another time. But I think what we'll do is stop now and take questions.
Yeah, great. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to have questions. And I will be watching your questions here in the chat. And while you haven't done it yet, I have a chance to ask my first question. The difference between victim and a survivor, how to move a person, to your mind, from somebody being a victim of something terrible that happened to them to a position of, I survived it. Right. You know, a lot of people who like to be victims, and right. You know that it's not healthy in the long run. Yes, we can take those steps. How to do that.
Right. So it's interesting because I think on the one hand, in the victim mentality, we're taking. We want reparations. We want somebody to pay for our pain. We want somebody to pay for our injury. And you could argue, certainly somebody who's hurt in war should get from the government some kind of reparation. And now it's a tricky line, because on the one hand you want them to get what they deserve. On the other hand, sometimes that receiving, that, oh, we'll take care of you, we'll take care of you, we'll take care of you, encourages that feeling of victimization. So I think it's a fine line between being a victim and moving into survivorship. But I think the way, and I think I learned this lesson myself from having cancer. I had cancer about 11 years ago. And one of the questions that was on my mind is, why did this happen to me? And I think once I was able to move away from why does this happen to me to what do I do in my life? What difference will this make to my life? What do I need to learn from this and take forward? Then I was able to grow. As long as I was stuck in that me, why did this happen to me? Then I was stuck. And once I was able to move out of that and find meaning and find purpose, I think that's really helpful in moving into not only surviving, but thriving. So,
Excellent. Wow. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm still waiting for your questions, and I have a chance to ask the second one then. Let's start small, because I have a next question probably about the cultural issues, a culture of gratitude, or a culture of thinking about what can you share, what feelings can you share. But let's start from small culture, organizational culture, and let's start from those who are demonstrating this culture, leaders and elders in the organization. What should they do in order to build resilience in them?
So that was actually one of my slides, had to do with looking to see where my employees are, where is the team that I'm leading, how am I leading, how open am I with what's going on. And I think in this unusual situation, and war is an unusual situation, we can take down some of those barriers that perhaps ordinarily were in place. Maybe in the workplace, we didn't talk about what was going on at home. Maybe in the workplace, we didn't share our feelings. But I think that there's room when an entire country is going through something very difficult, we can stop and we can talk to each other as people, not only as boss and employee, but let's start off the staff meeting and see, how are people doing? How are you managing? And actually relate to them, not only in terms of, did you meet your deadline? Did you do your sales? Did you do your whatever it was you were supposed to do? Did you meet your deadlines? Let's look beyond that. How are you doing? How are your family members? What is your household like? Do you have a son that's in the Army? Do you have a grandson in the Army? A husband? Like, what is going on? Let's find out who these people are and what they're going through, and see and really treat them as people. And I think when they're treated like that, they become so much more loyal to the organization and to the whatever they're seen as people. So I think, but it has to start from the top. It really has to start from the boss and from the person who's in charge. Like, I'm having a hard time, or it's really not easy. I know it's not easy for many people. And start with that. So I think there really is room to develop, to change the culture a little bit, to open it up a little bit. And I'm not saying that everybody's going to immediately pour their hearts out and start crying, but let's acknowledge that we're all going through a hard time, and this can affect our work as well.
So here's another fine line. Before, we used to say, if you have some problems at home, leave them at home. But now we're saying, let's have one step into becoming humans to each other. It's not a therapeutic group, it's not a tea group, but
No.
this is a business with a human face, let's say. And we have two questions here. Fantastic. They are similar. The second says, what is the best advice to those who suddenly lose their homes or their belongings? And the first one is basically the similar. People, when they are traumatized, they would like to say, no, it didn't happen to me. So what would you do? How would you help? How would you start helping those people who lost something and who don't want to acknowledge that?
Well, I think what we need to do first is to listen, to open our ears. So, if somebody has lost all of their home and all of their belongings, for example, in the workplace, that would be, that is where I would expect the workplace to step up and say, how can we help you? What can we do for you? And depending on what the organization is and what kind of resources they have, help that person figure out what to do, because it could be that there are social services, but it could be that social services are overwhelmed. I don't know. And I think that as humans to humans, this is somebody that I work next to every day. Well, she should be able to come in and share what's happened, and we should be able to gather together and figure out how we can help her put a roof over her head, gather food for her, gather clothing. Maybe she needs something for her children, for her spouse, but really an acknowledgement. And I think what you said before is, leave your home at home, and when you come to work, you just work. That's not really realistic. It's not really realistic. And I think in times of war, certainly in this emergency situation, it's an opportunity to really bring the human face into the workplace. So somebody who has really experienced that kind of loss, my expectation would be that there's community around, even in the business school. And I don't know how your business school works, but let's say a student has lost everything. Well, that could be a way for other students to do something, to help out, to find meaning during this time, because people want to do things. In Israel, one of the things that we find is that the level of volunteerism goes way up when bad things happen. I think that that's a human response, and a human response that can and should be encouraged. So that's my answer to the first question. The second question is a little trickier. Somebody experienced something very difficult and they don't want to acknowledge it. Is that's pretty much what you're saying?
Right, absolutely.
Okay, so let's say somebody, God forbid, lost a family member, okay? And they come to work the next day, or they come to work 2 days later, and they don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to deal with it. And everybody around them is like, everybody's talking about it, and that person wants to work. They don't want to deal with it. So on the one hand, we have to respect them, because we know that people are different. Not everybody, that's one thing we know for sure. Different people react differently. And if somebody, for example, comes to work after they lost somebody close to them, what I would say, the boss, the person who's in charge of that person, would be sensitive if he or she came to that person and said, hey, listen, I know that it's got to be a very difficult time for you. We are here for you for whatever you need, when you need it. Just let them know. And you can do that. You can say that again. And you can say that more than once. You can't force somebody to talk about things that they don't want to talk about. For some people, the way they cope best is by pushing it all aside. Usually that doesn't work too well. It's not recommended on the one hand. On the other hand, you cannot force them. So just saying, listen, if you ever want to come and talk to me, it might be a week from now, 2 weeks from now, I'm here. Showing that you have a heart and that you're sensitive and you know that it's got to be a difficult time goes a long way. Even if they haven't said anything, even if it looks like they're not responding, for them to hear that from the people around them has got to be very comforting.
So is that what you're saying, that it's about offering more than forcing help?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a very good way to say that. Yeah.
Great. Before I think we will be getting more questions, and I will move from here. For many, many years, at least I experienced that when I was growing, we had a saying, and probably you can say that's a local culture in Ukraine, in this part of the world, that men don't cry. Sharing feelings is not what is appreciated. You have your feelings, it's none of my business. I don't want to hear that. Just leave it at home. It's not common for many of us. It was not common for many of us Ukrainians to share feelings openly or half openly. What would you do organizationally in order to welcome this culture of sharing your feelings? Again, without creating a therapeutic group inside of a business, but saying that it is okay to start speaking about what you are going through.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have had that experience. It's first of all, the cultures change and people change. There's been a really big change, I would say, in Israel over the last 20 years that I've been working in this field. So, they used to say, oh, soldiers never cry, paratroopers never cry. And then over the years, the paratroopers actually do cry. They lose a buddy, they actually do cry. And there's more and more recognition and understanding that it's important for them to process what they have been through. They will be much healthier people and much more resilient if they're given an opportunity. How do you change the culture? It doesn't change overnight. It really doesn't change overnight. But I think if you're in a leadership, you can lead the way by sharing some of your feelings, so that if you, in your work environment, you can without feeling ashamed or embarrassed, say, I want to share with you some of the feelings that I've been having. And that leads the way. I think that allows people to say, oh, wow, he or she is, in that position, and they have those feelings. I have those feelings too. He or she is talking about them. It's not going to change overnight, but I think that's the beginning. People writing about feelings, talking about them, understanding that bottling them up is probably not a good thing for us. We know that when we share our feelings with our partner, with our spouse, we let them know how we're feeling. We feel a lot better, right? So we share with our friends, with our coworkers. We're going to.
Wow. We have a next fantastic question. And to my mind, that's actually two questions. Number one, what recommendations for psychological assistance would you give to people who spend a lot of life in shelters? And I'll give you a little background. As of right now, we spend at least several hours a day in shelters, simply because we have 2, 3, 4 air raid sirens a day, and you literally have to stop your work or risk your life. But in some businesses that is forbidden. So you literally have to drop everything down and you have to go until the danger is over. And it affects people, that probably better than any other nation in the world. how would you psychologically assist people who experience that?
So first of all, we have to acknowledge that it affects us. It affects us in our bodies. Trauma affects the body. And we must take care of ourselves and listen to our bodies. It's really important to be able to discharge all of that energy and all of that tension. How can we discharge it? First of all, we have to acknowledge that it's there, okay? Not just say, oh, yeah, it's not there. We have to acknowledge. Second, we have to take care of our bodies. And a good way to do it is exercising, walking, running, dancing, moving your body, shaking it out. There's exercises that I teach when I called shaking. We actually shake. You shake your whole body, and you do that for 2 minutes or for 4 minutes. It feels really good. You get rid of a lot of that tension. Acknowledging that sitting in a shelter and running to a shelter is not just nothing. It is something. Of course, if the shelter is more comfortable, if there's something that I can do there to distract myself, I have a book to read, I can watch TV, or I don't know what the shelters look like. I don't know if there's internet. Usually there's no internet reception in shelters, so your phones aren't going to be much good. But if there's something that you can do to help you pass the time in a more pleasant way, that's of course helpful. But I think recognizing that we really need to take care of ourselves during this very stressful time, that if you spent 2 or 3 hours in a shelter, you can't just expect yourself to just pick yourself up and go right back to exactly where you are. It's going to take a toll, and we have to be good to ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves.
I always in these moments, I remind myself that I have to learn from my dog, where it changes its state. It literally shakes, and it becomes the state becomes different. It's just a funny reminder that this is a biological mechanism. So
100% true. The psychologist Peter Levine has written extensively about how the body holds the trauma and how shaking is actually the way animals discharge. And it's really a very good way for us to discharge. So some people might find shaking difficult, but going out and taking a run or taking a really fast walk or putting on music and just dancing to the music and getting it out, those are all really good ways to help discharge. Yeah.
But here's a different shaking, and that's the second part of the same question. When people are coming back home from places they were in danger, and I don't know, I don't see the details of that, but let's assume that these are civilians, not military people, because that's a totally different story. And they are literally shaking because of the stress they had experienced. What do they have to do in order to, get rid of this nervousness shaking, right, and come back to the comfortable way of operating and living?
Okay, so the first thing, if we're with the person like that, is to give them a hot drink. Give them a cup of tea. Let them hold the cup of tea and take some drinks. And really just what we need to do is ground ourselves, because their head or their body is somewhere else, and just grounding. So holding a hot cup of tea can be very good. Also doing simple activities. If somebody is really kind of spaced out, having them, do some very simple activities. Ask them to bring you something. Can you bring me a glass of water from the refrigerator? Just going down the hall, getting the water and bringing it very often will help people come back into themselves. So very simple grounding activities can be very helpful. And of course, I don't know what kind of psychological services you have available, but if people are really disconnected, dissociated from their bodies, and that continues for a period of time, then they really need to get some professional help. And the professional help can be very short-term focused. I'm not talking about long-term therapy, but there's some very specific techniques that somebody who's trained in trauma therapy and trauma treatment, acute stress disorder. That's really what it's called. Acute stress disorder can do that can really help the person come back into themselves.
Fantastic.
One of the things that I just really want to remind you is that these are normal reactions. The reactions that you're describing are normal when people are in situations of extreme stress, and air raid sirens and bombings are extreme stress. These reactions are normal reactions, nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about. We know different people have different thresholds and react differently. Doesn't mean you're bad or there's something wrong with you. It just means that, that's the way your body and you react. So knowing that you're normal can also go a long way to healing.
Can I then say that grounding and accepting these reactions as normal would be some of the methods to develop the resilience ability in a person?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's important to educate ourselves. And there's a lot of information on the internet about trauma and normal reactions to trauma that can be very helpful. I think the more we understand and the more we know, that helps protect us, so that if I'm shaking, I know that that's a normal reaction. And if I breathe, or if I move, or if I take a drink or eat something and calm myself down, it'll get better.
Remember that what I live for and whom I'm grateful for and what I'm grateful for, these are also the things that you've been talking about before, and these are the things that are developing the resilience ability, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. What if, and there's our next questions, and I remember I asked one question, I'll come back to it. What if the person in stress is aggressively reacting to another people around them who are not the reason for their stress? They were not bombing them, but these are the reactions of that are
Right.
manifested by a person. What would you do?
Well, I think, first of all, we want to make sure that everybody's safe. We want, if somebody's very aggressive, if somebody's yelling and screaming, that's one thing. But if they actually become violent, that's something else. So we have to understand that people react differently. And certainly a strong reaction would also, I think, in the greater scheme of things, be considered a normal reaction if it passes. So if that person, yells and screams for 20 minutes and then calms down, okay, so that's the way he lets off his steam. Of course, if that person becomes physically violent, that's unacceptable. Then we have to figure out, I don't think we have to be understanding of that at all. And I think if we can help the person who's reacting, kind of move them into a different mode of reaction, if we can kind of get them off of their crying and move them, or yelling, and move them into a more productive way of discharging their energy, that's probably helpful. Maybe talking with them afterwards and saying, I know you were really upset. Maybe there's something else we could do, I could help you with, you could do, if that happens again, to
Great.
get some insight,
This idea of ensuring your safety, and then talking to a person when the stress level is a bit down, which will come physiologically. That's a very good advice, and thank you so much for that. And here's another great question, and I think a lot of Ukrainians are coping with that. How deeply can we involve children, and by children we mean 5 to 10 years, in conversations about real war?
So important.
They see it all, but should we talk about details, or should we? How far should we go?
Yeah, so first of all, it's really important to talk with children, and children know a lot more. Sometimes we think we can protect them, that they don't know, that they're better off not knowing. And what we know, and we learned this very, very early on in Israel, is that kids know everything. Because if you're not going to tell them, they're going to find out from their friend who has an older brother or an older sister, or from the street. They're going to find out. So if we want to have some kind of control of what our kids know, it's best that we talk to them. Now, depending on how old they are and what their understanding is, we may tell them, we may share more or less. It's never essential to share all graphic details. So for example, if God forbid, like we had the terrorist attack was with hatchets, they were I don't know, I think that's the word in English. I know what the word is in Hebrew, but it was brutal. They were brutal murders. So I don't think that a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or even a 10-year-old needs to know that 3 people were killed with hatchets. They need to know that there were 3 people killed. That they need to know, and that we're sad about it, and it's really upsetting, and for some people it's scary. But I don't think we have to go into graphic details about how they were killed, and certainly not show them pictures of it, etc., etc. So the details are less important. The general picture is certainly important, and how we frame it for our kids is really, it's in our hands. But we must talk to our children. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I know is women and children of Ukraine who are going to other countries to save their lives. They're creating these psychological support groups, and they're sitting with children of each other while others are looking for a job in Poland and Hungary and Slovakia and Bulgaria and Romania and other countries around us. And basically, these are the communities that help. Well, let me ask this as a question. Do you think this will help building resilience to those people who are currently outside of their home country?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we know, and this is something that we kind of talked in a roundabout way about this, but now we talk about it directly. Social supports are so important. They're probably the most important feature of resilience. So developing social supports, and it can be at the workplace. We talked about how the workplace can be more empathic. Is student union, the student groups, sharing, and certainly the groups of women and children who are refugees now and living in difficult conditions, sharing and being part of community is probably the single most important thing that will help them.
And probably people of Israel can teach the world a lot, because you are the nation who were living in exile for centuries, and communities is this one of the strongest features of Israel community. What do you think helped you still be a nation and still support each other during all those times and during the war times in those periods of history?
Well, it's interesting. If we think about the 2,000 years of exile, certainly it was a common religion and a common language. Even though it wasn't much of a spoken language, it was our holy language. And I believe that really helped us stay together through the exile. But coming back into the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, I think having a common goal, understanding that this is our country and that, we're willing to stay here no matter what the cost. We're here. We have nowhere else to go. There used to be a joke, and this goes back many, many years before the Six-Day War, when the threat to Israel was really very great, and all of the countries around Israel were threatening Israel. They would say, the last one here, turn out the light. In other words, we were going to go down to the last man. There was no doubt about it. Nobody was going anywhere. Nobody was running away. And that feeling that we're here and we have a common goal and a common purpose also, I think is very much resilience. Now, on the day-to-day in Israel, there's so much that we don't agree on among ourselves. We fight all the time, all the time. But when there's an outside threat, everybody comes together. Yeah.
Probably we are similar here. And your ex-prime minister, Mrs. Golda Meir, said it's really difficult to govern in a country where you have 5 million prime ministers.
Right.
And that's depicting a Ukrainian society, pre-war society, because we never agreed with each other, and we have so many different points of view. But when the war had started, we said, okay, we'll deal with that later. Let's fight our enemy, and then we will come back to that. Okay, here's another question, and I will ask you if you have about 10 or 12 more minutes of extra time. Is that okay with you?
I have about another 10 minutes, till about 8:10, then I need to move along.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Here's a question. Okay, there was an active state of anger and hatred, and then there's a depression and powerlessness. Is it normal? And what do you do?
Yeah, I think sometimes the anger and the fighting out masks the depression, and we get tired, and then when we get tired, we become depressed. What do we do? That's a big question. I think what we need to do, it's important to remember that during times of high stress, it's really important to take care of ourselves. So all of you, even if you're on the front line, you're not on the front line, the entire country is living in a state of emergency. And if it's not directly you're still exposed to what's going on, and you may have friends and family and in cities or in places that are much more under attack. We need to take care of ourselves and acknowledge that, and not feel bad about it. Not feel, oh, how could I take care of myself at a time like this? No, we have to do the things we know that are good for us, whether it's eating well, sleeping well, taking a day off, walking in the country, do what physical exercise. We really need to take care of ourselves during times of high stress. So I think that can go a long way to preserving our mental health. And then there are the other things that we talked about, gratitude, being compassionate to ourselves. We didn't talk about that so much, but those are some of the things. Of course, if somebody is experiencing a mental health crisis, it's important to get them some professional help.
Right. One of the toughest things in the tough times is the feeling of guilt. Sometimes we're guilty because we survived. Sometimes, and that's the current situation in Ukraine, we feel guilty because we cannot help those who stay on the occupied territories, who is losing their lives or is under threat to their lives. What would you say to people who say, why them, not me? What should I do? I cannot really help, and I feel guilty because of that.
Right. So I think, we got to figure out what we can do. So it could be raising money. It could be sending supplies. It could be sending them letters. I mean, there are always things that you can do. You're not going to actually be able to take their place, nor do you want to take their place. But there are things that you can do. And I think that goes for all of us. Like, we see what's going on and we go, oh, this is terrible. What can I do? And there are things to do. So it's a matter of looking around, finding the organization that you want to support, finding the people who are doing humanitarian aid. There are things that you can do with that feeling, which is a terrible feeling of being a bystander and watching awful things happening. Yeah.
All right. And finishing up, I would come back to the organizational side. Well, okay, so there's a little question to you as a psychologist. Probably you can answer it quickly. If the person is trembling, should you help him or her tremble stronger in order to leave the stress out?
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea to join them and shake with them. Really just shake, shake,
All
shake,
right.
shake, 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 shake,
Excellent.
shake.
As I
Yeah.
said,
And
you
because it's
answered
going to
quick.
pass. It's going to pass. Because if you try to contain them, no, they need to shake. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay,
Yeah.
coming back to our final organizational issue. If you are talking about a systemic organizational and cultural resilience, what Israeli communities, Israel as a country can say this works. Psychological health, yes, you said about that, but probably you can say something else, like hotlines or professional help, or paratroopers do cry and that's normal. What are the key factors that will help culture and nation be resilient in general?
Well, I think creating communities and supporting communities, providing resources that you talked about. You talked about whether it's hotline or mental health resources. And I think really coming together as a people. How do we come together as a people? It starts with neighborhoods. It starts with small groups and larger groups and even larger groups. But it really starts at a grassroots level, being part of a group. I think the smaller groups lead to the larger groups, and the larger groups leads to the whole country. But this notion of we're all in this together and we need to support each other is very important. Activity is very important. Finding something to do that you feel beyond work, beyond what you volunteering can go really a long way to building resilience.
And here is what I hear from you, from your words, and I'm seeing it here in Ukraine and in Ukrainian communities around the world, is people don't wait for someone, for somebody, for some organizational to take care of them. They stand, they do. Maybe they do it better, maybe they do it less effective, but they keep doing, they keep learning. And as Israel did it in 1948 and doing it on and on and on, as Ukraine is doing it now. And I hope that our nations will join our efforts in this walk to resilience. And I don't want a world to learn from us, because I don't want the war. That's a terrible thing. But if they want to learn from us,
what we have done is we have taken, really difficult situations and learned a lot and been able to share all over the world, whether it's in Nepal after an earthquake, or Haiti, or in Germany, or Spain, or in Africa, all over the world, we really have been able to share. And that's really a wonderful feeling, to take this very difficult situation and what are we going to do with it? What are we going to learn from it? And where do we go from here? I just want to share I had several more slides, which you may or may not get. But I just wanted to share this final one, which has my email and my contact. Oops, there we go. Where'd it go? There we are. So if anybody would like to contact me, that's my email. And
right?
You can ask me a question, naomibaum.com. And again, that's our book. So it's in English and in Norwegian. It's not in Ukrainian yet. But if you're interested, I can connect you. So that was really the last thing I wanted to share. I wanted to share my email there. Okay.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much. Our time is over, and I would like to thank you for a fantastic discussion. It was Naomi Baum, PhD, trauma and resilience psychologist from Israel for Ukraine. Thank you so much. Okay. Be well, and lots of resilience. Lots of resilience. We're rooting for all of you. We really are. Thank you so much, Naomi. Take care. Have a good time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, I'm going to over and out.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.